Hello and welcome aboard this final service for Inside Number 9. Yes, we're on the last ever series now, and much as it makes me sad to see it depart, I'm so glad the lads were able to finish it on their own terms. And they've always seemed to manage that. Remember, the League of Gentlemen ended, but then we got Psychoville. Then Psychoville ended, but then we got Inside Number 9. So I'm sure they'll go on to do many great things in the future, and I can't wait to see what they do next. But for now, we'll be discussing episode 1, To A Goose, where a bunch of people get stuck waiting around with increasing anxiety due to some technical difficulties. And no, I'm not talking about the ordeal that was trying to get tickets for the Number 9 live show, which I'm sure many of you listening will relate to. I got mine in the end, by the way, after only about an hour and a half, so I will be reviewing that show for anyone who misses out. I know that's not the same as actually being there, but it's the best I can do. Anyway, this particular scenario involves a group of passengers being held up in an underground train tunnel, which is never a pleasant experience, and this is no exception. There are 9 of them in total, naturally, all with very different personalities and from very different walks of life. Tensions arise and interpersonal conflicts happen, and, well, we'll get to spoilers eventually, and I will give you ample warning. Things escalate after a purse goes missing, and that's when we start to see people's true colours. How that plays out and why it matters, though, remains to be seen. It's quite sweet in a way that To A Goose has echoes of the very first episode where people are forced together in a confined space. Even though these people are all strangers, while the Sardines cast were all related, it still feels like a nod to the very beginning, and I think there's something quite nice about that. I was also reminded of La Couchette from Series 2, which I still think is an underrated episode. But while La Couchette was a stronger comedy, I think To A Goose has a lot more tension and drama going on, and so it stands out on its own. Speaking of standing out, I have to say that I thoroughly enjoyed Steve Pemberton as the drag queen Wilma Dick show. And can we just take a second to appreciate that name? It's just fantastic. It feels like drag is just second nature to Steve at this point. Not that he usually considers his characters to be drag, but surely I'm not the only one who misses Pauline. And of course, Steve slays absolutely everything around him, not just chewing the scenery, but using it to show off his impressive gag reflex. So yeah, standout performance from the get-go. And while he's playing the more subdued type, amped up, or should that be amped down to comedically pathetic degrees, Reese is equally brilliant here as one half of middle-class theatre-going couple Jerry and Edith. But while they might be on the same page initially, we see some interesting tension between the two as they don't seem equally enthralled with their aggressively mundane suburban life. By the way, if anyone had bamboo on their card for the first thing one of Reese's characters would be getting irrationally angry at this series, then well done to you. All of the supporting cast here are absolutely solid. From the kindly nurse Elena, played by Philippa Dunn, stern ex-teacher Raymond, played by Mark Bonnar, Mon the Scots, the bold and outspoken Cleo, played by Susan Wokoma, and poor beggar Mossy, played by Charlie Cooper. Sadly, I saw Mossy's situation play out on the London Underground far too often, and it only seemed to get more and more frequent. You know, with someone desperately looking for spare change and everyone in the train doing their very best to pretend they don't even exist, as if things weren't dehumanising enough for them already. Rounding off the cast, we have Joel Fry from Game of Thrones and In the Earth, as well as many other things, so probably a well-known face to most of you watching. One face I didn't recognise at first was Matthew Kelly, and if you happen to be a 90s kid plonked in front of the TV on a Saturday night, then you'll no doubt remember that name. But it turns out that he was a proper actor long before Stars on the Rise and You Bet, and he does a great turn here as Harold. This old guy is a complete wildcard, smiling away, randomly chiming in and giving the occasional rendition of Gilbert and Sullivan. The song I've Got a Little List is an interesting one to have here, by the way, as Coco's lyrics are frequently rewritten for different productions reflecting on those who might be perceived as nuisances to society. But I digress. Harold was an interesting character, even if you wouldn't want him near your vintage Star Wars figurines. So before I get into proper spoilers, hands up everyone who noticed the very subtle nod to Inside Number 9 with the purple sock reference, and the fairly obscure nod to the man with the report from Series 3 of the League of Gentlemen. You'd be forgiven for missing that one, so no shame if you did. I do love their little in-jokes, nice bit of dopamine for the more obsessive fans, and yes, I do include myself in that. Also, the hair, so I'm told, is actually a sticker seen within the train carriage, although I will admit I didn't spot it myself this time. Our next station is Spoiler Central, so if you're departing the number 9 service here, then we'd like to wish you a pleasant onward journey. Please mind the gap, and if you see something that doesn't look right, well, remember it's inside number 9 you're watching, and it's like that sometimes. I was going to throw in a pun about the number 9 service terminating soon, but that'll just make us all too sad, so I'll leave you be. See you next week for the trolley problem, and I'm already on board with that as a title. Bye for now. As for the rest of you, see it, say it, sorted. The catchphrase that will be haunting us all for the next decade or so, as will any train disruptions or CCTV equipment spotted around stations. I'd suggest getting the number 9 bus instead, but we all know how that turned out, don't we? I will be honest about my first watch. While I was still engaged in the story and premise and having the odd chuckle with Steve's body comments, I was starting to think that this might not be a particularly strong episode. I kept wondering where they were going with the social commentary, feeling that they might not be going anywhere with it at all besides a possible depiction of the bystander effect, and I even wondered if we might be watching one of Ollie Plimsoll's issue-based plays. No Home for Mossy or something like that. But now that I've seen the ending and the chilling arrival of the replacement services, I take it all back. They knew exactly what they were doing, not just through the dialogue, but through the background detail in the posters and their slogans, and even in the soundtrack, which I really liked, but didn't quite seem to fit the story we thought we were watching. But it makes far more sense once you know the real underlying themes, so well done there. That ending though. I've heard comparisons to Black Mirror and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but my first thought was The Stepford Wives. The book, that is, as I don't think there's been an adaptation to date that truly captures the fear I got from the novel. For me, it's the creeping idea that people around you, no matter how much they insist that they love and support you exactly as you are, would gladly switch you out in a heartbeat for a quieter, more compliant, hollowed-out version of you. Thankfully, that personal fear has largely gone away from me over the years, but I think it's still an idea that cuts quite deep and works brilliantly in horror and science fiction. But personal anxieties aside, I think as a societal fear, this one might be even more prevalent than ever before. After all, we're currently living in an era where people are encouraged to put the very best versions of themselves online, not just for their friends and family, but out of the fear that potential employers or even the authorities might be watching at any time. Then you've got the pressure to live up to that carefully cultivated image in real life, while somehow always being genuine. The old mixed message of just be yourself, but no, not like that, it's too much. Maybe I'm going off on a tangent here, but that's just because the last 2 minutes really tapped into something with me and I did not see it coming. So here are a few thoughts I had on my second viewing. First of all, it's the evidence that this process has been going on for some time and that 2 of the passengers have already been replaced. That's why Jerry and Harold don't need the gas masks. The real versions of them have already been killed. It makes sense now, the way Edith talks about Jerry's past rebellions and wondering what happened to the old firebrand who once led the worker strikes. Well, there's your answer. Anything for a quiet life, am I right? It's also quite disturbing the way he tells Edith, deep breaths, it doesn't hurt. Yeah, that's not the impression I got from watching them die seconds later. And what would he know? He wasn't the one who died, he's just the replacement Jerry and possibly not even human. As for Harold, I can't help but wonder if he's a broken clone, hence the rambling and the random comments. Or maybe he's the more socially acceptable version of a past Harold who was louder and more aggressive while riding the train and unwilling to show people what was in his bag. Not that you'd want to look at it too closely. And then there's Finn, hiding in plain sight, provoking a reaction or lack thereof by any means necessary. And it's interesting to see what it is he's trying to root out. Because it isn't about sorting citizens by morality or how kind and honest they are, but purely by how compliant they'll be with authority. Finn literally gets choked by Raymond at one stage, but there are no repercussions for that at all because Finn was not presented as an authority figure, just a twitchy conspiracy theorist riding a train. Other factors that might class people as disruptors in other dystopias, such as Wilma's flamboyance and rejection of gender norms, is fine so long as they don't question the systems that have directly enabled abuse towards them. Yes, she suffered, but Wilma is ultimately willing to witness her friend being murdered, signed a waiver that said it never happened, and walked away with the empty shell that has just replaced Cleo. That part was just really disturbing to watch. And while Elena is a kind and empathetic person who's visibly horrified by what she's seen, the fact that she wouldn't challenge it means she just goes on living in this hellish society, having witnessed the full atrocities that the powers that be are capable of. That sounds like such a horrible fate. And of course no one would believe her even if she was somehow willing to tell. Well, she seems like the polar opposite of Raymond, who, once again, was completely okay to grab a stranger by the neck for not complying with an order. Both of them are given a pass just because they happen to fall in line with the social order, either for not wanting to rock the boat or because they're just perfectly happy to enforce that authority. All in all, that's pretty fucked up. And on the other side, we have Mossy refusing to comply with the demands of just some guy who's already decided he's guilty. While Raymond is adamant that Mossy is a thief, Finn is the one who ultimately decides everyone's fate, and he knows that Mossy couldn't have stolen the purse because Finn already has it, and so Raymond's accusation means nothing. From the looks of it, it's Mossy's single act of defiance that seems to cost him his life, even though Raymond had absolutely no right to accuse him in the first place. Edith and Cleo are also executed purely because of their willingness to take a stand against injustice. I do wonder though at which point their fates were sealed, because Mossy reports that the replacement service is on its way just over halfway through the episodes. That's before Edith makes a real stand, but it does come up after she tried to put her hand up. Of course, it's possible that these three have been targets for much longer, maybe before they even got on the train, or maybe there was some incriminating data found about their person, possibly through their phones with causes they've supported online or through their banking information as suggested earlier by Finn. Either way, the rules of this world are disturbing in the extreme, and the way the authorities rectify that earlier disruption on the line is nothing short of horrifying. So now we all have a fun anagram for Meryl Streep, or that Meryl as I'm sure she's known to her friends. And yeah, as someone who would have almost definitely been burned as a witch a few centuries ago, this was a very scary episode and also one of my favourite number 9 twists in quite a while now that I think about it. A fine start to the series in my opinion. But what did you think? This is another great one to watch twice, so I'm dying to hear all the little details that other people might have noticed in To A Goose. Comment below with your own thoughts or if there's anything I've missed out. If you could like and subscribe while you're at it, then that would help me out massively. Cheers in advance. Episode 2 is coming up next week, so ring the bell if you want to be among the first to hear my thoughts, and share your own in the comments. Thank you for travelling with Number 9 Railways, and we hope you all have a pleasant day.